Hi everyone, today's build video is my long overdue submission to the Winter in the Wastelands 4 tip of the spear. Unfortunately I was juggling one too many projects and fighting off a cold, hence I never got this one finished on time. I also kind of went to town on the animation, which is another reason why I didn't get this video out sooner. For those who don't know, Winter in the Wasteland is an open community build hosted by Jim Silver over on the Silver Diecast Customs channel, which I recommend you go and check out. The theme for this year's event: you're part of a large group of survivors, and unfortunately there's a rival group of survivors who keep stealing your group's supplies, which you'll need to survive this harsh upcoming winter. So your group has decided to put an end to this by attacking and disabling the other group. Due to your experience, you've been given the task to build the vehicle that will lead the charge. Your vehicle will need to be tough enough to take on heavily fortified defences, as well as other possible armed vehicles, as well as leading your group's vehicles into battle, hence tip of the spear. As you'll see on the turntable, I have a 132 scale Jada Cadillac Escalade. I bought this diecast some time ago since I thought it looked like the perfect drug dealer's vehicle, and just plan to use it in a few cops and robbers style animations. Unfortunately, as you can kind of see here, it doesn't quite scale up that well with the Mega Constructs figures that I use in my animations. So I kind of put this to one side and forgot about it. So considering this thing is way out of scale, my idea for this is to build a death ray style vehicle, since it will be covered in armour and weapons and it will be a lot harder to figure out what the vehicle was. As for the lore behind this build, I decided that my group figured that whatever they sent in to lead the attack was most likely not coming back. So instead of wasting one of their more valuable vehicles and getting that all shot up, they went out scavenging and found this Pimp My Ride style SUV and just decided to bolt a load of armour and weapons to this, send it in, let it unleash hell. If it gets destroyed, as long as the crew come back, all's good. So it was just basically a disposable vehicle for this one task. To start this build off, I grabbed this MG42 looking machine gun, which came from a pack of Maysto's World War II German troopers, which you'll have seen in a previous animation. Initially I was thinking of mounting this to the hood or the side, like you see in the typical death race vehicles, but then I thought it makes sense for this to be like a hull gun, like on a tank, so the passenger would use this one. So first I attempted to cut the windshield using my hobby knife, just scoring down the middle. This proves to be a little ineffective, so instead I grabbed my sprue cutters. Now normally I would remove the glass to do something like this, but with these Jada castings the glass sections are kind of riveted to the roof on the inside, like you see here. I attempt to do the same for the back, as I plan to mount a machine gun in the back as well. Unfortunately, I got used to sprue cutters, and where I was fearing happens, where the glass kind of splits and cracks. So in the end I just decided to tear everything out. I then cleaned up the edges with my hobby knife off camera. Next I cut some rivets out of some styrene rod. I glued these into place around the edges of the windows, so it looks like the windows are being replaced with some armoured panels. Off camera I felt these looked cartoonishly too big, so instead I replaced them with some rhinestones I had. Following this, I decided to beef up the wheel arches with some of this L-shaped styrene. To do this, I measured around the wheel arch, then marked out on the styrene where I needed to make the cuts, so I could cut and fold this into shape around the wheel arch. Gluing them in place with some super glue. Off camera, I cut out some rectangle shapes to make up the armour panels for the door, cutting out a little notch for the door handles. Following this, I needed to make some armour for the front side windows. So I traced out the side window onto some styrene that I had. Cut these out a little larger than I needed so that I could sand them down and make them fit perfectly. I also drew on some portholes and cut those out with my hobby knife. And with all that done, I can then use some super glue to attach these to the doors. Next, I decided to make a reinforced front bumper using some of this L-shaped styrene to build a frame around the original bumper. With the framework built, I could then cut out some rectangle shape pieces to go over the top. Off camera, I traced out and cut the corner pieces for the front bumper. To add to the reinforced bumper and to hide this was a Cadillac Escalade, I built some bull bars using some more of the L-shaped styrene to build a frame around the top section of the hood. I then build up the rest of the bull bars using various pieces of flat styrene rod. With the bull bars and bumper done, I then measure out and cut a piece for the armour panel for the hood. I built a reinforced bumper for the rear, the same way as I built the front. This was a lot easier since the rear bumper was a lot more squared. And like before, with the framework complete, I cut some rectangle shapes to make up the bumper. I also cut up some more rectangle pieces to make the armour for the tailgate. Next it's time to add the front machine gun. First I start by drilling a hole into the body of the gun using my pin drill. I then do the same, drilling a hole into the dashboard. After this I can test fit a piece of styrene rod and mark out where I need to make the cut to connect the gun to the dashboard. After another quick test to make sure that the gun's sitting at the right height. I then glue the post to the bottom of the gun. For the tail gun, I make one up using some parts provided by the Foxbox Builder Shooter Kit. This is a kit that allows you to build multiple AUG guns with various different barrels and bodies and magazine types provided. I bought this off Ramshackle Games. With the gun assembled, I find it sits a little too low. So I decided to make a shelf out of this L-shaped styrene. Cutting it to the width of the partial shelf on the interior piece. With this cut and glued into place, I then drill and post it like I did with the front machine gun. After this I test fit everything to make sure it sits perfectly. I start by gluing these flat pieces of styrene in the inside of the window. This is to kind of act as a frame but also mark out where the gun is going to be sticking out. And then use some more of this same flat styrene to build up the armour around the gun. I also decided to cut the stock off the machine gun in the front, since I figure when I get a figure inside this and try and animate it, it's just going to get in the way. Next it was time to give this vehicle some real firepower, so I've taken inspiration from Death Race, specifically the big Dodge Ram pickup truck. I thought it'd be cool to have a row of RPGs on the roof. So for this I plan to use this RPG from the Meso figure packs that I've bought previously, which are like knockoff Mega Construx figures. The only problem is, unlike the Mega Construx RPG, which you'll see here, that has a hole drilled out for the warhead, these don't, so I'm going to have to drill the holes out myself. I decided to save myself some time and just grab 2 Panzerfists instead. So I've got 2 RPGs and 2 Panzerfists. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But also it makes sense in an apocalyptic setting, as they wouldn't have access to all the same weapon and they'd use multiple different weapon systems. Off camera I drill out the holes for the warheads on the RPGs, which I admit I've kind of done a poor job, as you can kind of tell here. To mount the launchers to the roof, I plan to use this square styrene tube to house the trigger grips. I also use some masking tape to cover part of the front windshield for a viewport. The plan is I'm going to paint over the top of it, and this is going to protect that small section. And after I paint over it and peel it off, I should have a nice little section for a viewport. After a quick test fit with the launchers, I see that they're kind of sitting crooked. And for this I'm going to use some square styrene rod, marking it out, cutting and bending it into shape. After another quick test fit, everything seems to fit perfectly. So I then attach them with some super glue. I then cut some more rivets and attach them to the arm panels, like so. I've always liked using riveted armour on my post-apocalyptic builds because it's very low tech and somewhat believable that it would be a technique used to armour up a vehicle. One of the main reasons we don't use this in armoured vehicles anymore is because the rivets tend to shoot out once the panel's been hit hard enough. They just kind of turn these into shrapnel. Not so bad on the outside of the vehicle, but when you're on the inside and in a small enclosed space, that's a bit of a nightmare situation. One of the final things I decided to add to the vehicle to kind of finish off that pimp my ride feel of the vehicle is a spoiler from my bits box. Finding these two are about the appropriate size, I end up choosing the larger one. Trimming down the posts before attaching it to the roof. With the building done, it's now time to move on to the painting. First I apply a homemade metallic blue, followed by a base coat of Revell Rust for the panels that I plan to do rust weathering on. And then follow this with a dry brushing of Revell Aquacolor Metallic Steel. And then paint a bunch of small details off camera just to save time, before finally applying my homemade black wash. This blends everything together and gives it a nice dirty Wasteland look. And here we have the final build. Didn't get to finish this one in time like I would have liked. I still feel it turned out pretty good. Initially I was planning to jack up the ride height and put a bunch of chunky off-road tyres on this, but about partway through the build I started to like how it looked with the very low profile, as if they just bolted the armour to it and it was almost collapsing due to the weight. I don't think they would have spent the time upgrading the suspension and the tyres on a vehicle they intended to destroy, so it just made more sense to leave it as is. I do intend to add this to my Death Race fleet of vehicles, so do expect to see it again someday. Please be sure to check out the other builds by searching Winter in the Wasteland 4 Tip of the Spear. As usual, stick around for the glamour shots and the animation because I really went to town on it. Hope you've all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.